He will be, yeah. He's just really just wanted to devote this week to helping his wife with the new baby. I'm sure she's got her hands full, needless to say, but then since she's busy probably nursing and caring, changing diapers and all that, and he's probably doing the same, everything else that needs to be done in life has to be done by somebody. So he's probably running errands. If you don't have children yet, I don't have any kids, but I've got lots of friends who've had them. And I'll tell you, I've watched them go through it. It's a lot of work. That first week is a lot of work. You get like no sleep, All right, so I originally wrapped up these cakes, and I had put them on boards with plastic on them. Whether you put plastic on it or not, you want to peel the paper off the bottom. I'm going to take the plastic off of this board, and I'm going to start building on one of these 10-inch boards. 10-inch board's a good size because if you use 10-inch, it will fit in a cake box. If you use a 12-inch board, you'd have to cut it down to fit in a cake box. So the 10-inch board is also just a little bit larger than your 9-inch, and if you're using an 8-inch, it'll fit nicely on there. One of the things that I do just as just to keep this from moving around too much is I usually grab a little bit of paper towel, and I just wet it. And I put a little piece of moist paper towel underneath mine. Just to get paper towel. It could be anything really. It could be paper towel. It could be a moist rag. It could be anything. But the idea is to keep it from moving around too much. Some cake decorators will actually put a dab of buttercream underneath and just keep it kind of glued down. But that'll just help it stay put, because it'll move around on you, and you don't want it to have to move around. Now if the cakes are fully cooled, I can handle them much easier than they would be if they were warm. So I'm just going to go ahead and place this centered on my board. Make sure it's centered on my turntable. It's a lot like working on a potter's wheel. There we go. That's pretty centered. I did do a little diagram up here of cake, filling, more cake, and then there's a little coating on the outside called a crumb coat. And we're going to start with that because I figure that cakes are made up of different components, and 2 layers is one way of doing it. I could also cut this into 2 layers each and make a 4-layer cake. It would be a bit taller, but it depends on your preference. I figured 2 is a good way to start if you haven't made many cakes in the past. And these cakes are very moist. You're going to see sometimes, if you ever watch YouTube videos and things on cakes, some people may soak their cake down with a liquid. Usually that's simple syrup. That's just a half and half mixture of water and sugar dissolved together. They usually flavor it. You can put rum in it, some people put vanilla in it, but they soak the cake down. That's great for drier cakes, cakes that have more of a dry texture. These are very moist cakes. I don't find they really need to be soaked. So I don't bother with soaking them. But if you see somebody doing that, they're probably using a recipe that is somewhat of a drier cake. And it does help. It helps a lot with moistening up the cake. So I'm just going to go ahead and put a fair amount of filling on there. This is just simple. I'm using as a filling. And we're going to go ahead and spread that. Some of the tools you're going to need a straight spatula. You're going to need an offset spatula. Offset is really handy. Why the difference? Well, when you're trying to smooth something, you don't want your knuckles to rub into what you're working on, and an offset helps keep your knuckles up off the surface. Straight spatula is usually referred to as an icing spatula, so I use this primarily when I'm applying icing. And all we're going to do to get this spread out is we're just going to go ahead and use the turntable to help us turn this around and get it even. I can also start from the center and spin, just getting that icing spread from the center on out. This is where turntables are the most wonderful thing, most wonderful tool that you can have. Okay, so now that I've got that spread and it's pretty even, we're gonna go ahead and get the other cake on there. Now, I call it a filling because it doesn't have to be icing, right? It could be anything. I've done this with raspberry jam. I put raspberry jam in between. I put chocolate ganache in between as a filling. I've done lots of different things when it comes to fillings. And you could do what you really like. So the one thing I haven't had much success with is mousse. I've tried using mousse, and unless it's refrigerated and kept really cold, mousse tends to be a little bit delicate. So, but now the filling is in there, I want to take a look at this cake and see if it needs trimming of any kind. You know, I look at the edge here, and this is still pretty nice and soft, so I think I can do it without trimming. But if something was uneven, or if it had a hard crust on it, you could take a knife and you could remove a little of the crust. You could just take a knife and just take a paper thin layer off the outside. The idea being that it won't be tough, right? That'll just it's like taking the crust off a piece of bread. It just takes that little bit of toughness off. I find this is nice and soft the way it is, so I probably won't need any trimming. If your cake was domed, I saw one that was fairly domed. If that's the case, you could come along and you could cut off the dome. You could take, or at least flatten the dome to make it easier to ice. Because when it is domed like that, you'd either have to have very thin icing in the middle and very thick on the sides to make it level, or you can just level the cake to start with, and it makes life a little easier. It just happened with one cake. It was Alex's, I think your 8-inch especially was domed. And it would be an easy trim. You just start at the spot where you think you would want your low point to be, and just start going around until your knife makes it to the middle, and then just take that off. And a lot of bakeries use those cake scraps. They'll hold on to them. You can make cake balls. We used to make faux brownies out of them. We used to put a little corn syrup and a couple of eggs and things like that, and just take all the cake scraps and grind them up in a mixer, and then press them into a sheet pan and bake them off. And they'd be faux brownies. We cover them in chocolate ganache. Everybody loved it. They didn't know any better. And it was really good. So, and here we're taking what would be throwaway and turning into something we could sell. So it was well worth it. But yeah, cake balls, then you can put sticks on them and dip them in chocolate. It can be really good, I love cake balls. Some people make them like truffles too. They'll just roll them in chocolate and without the stick and just eat them, I'll bet. So all I'm doing here is I'm cleaning up some of the excess that came out of the outside here. And I'm going to keep a little container here on the side for icing like this that I take off the edge of the cake, because it has crumbs in it, and I don't want to get crumbs in my icing if I can help it. We're going to start with the crumb coat. Now, the crumb coat is designed to glue down the crumbs, so that's the idea, is to keep crumbs under control, because nothing screams amateur more than having crumbs in your outer coating of your cake. If they're contained and in the crumb coat, that's one thing, but when they're on the outer coat, that means it screams amateur. If you want to seem like you have a nice professional cake, you just keep those crumbs under control. So we're going to do that. We're going to put a thin coat on the outside here of some Swiss, and I'm just going to plop some on here with my icing spatula. And I'm not going to make it real thick. The idea here is to contain the crumbs. So I'm not really worried about making it really thick. In fact, I'll probably even be able to see the cake through it. Then with this extra icing, I'm going to come along the side. And I don't just come around this side for your benefit so you can see it, but also, this is actually how I ice. I ice up over the top. Let me grab a little more icing, put some on here. This is really, as I say, a glue to hold the crumbs down. The other thing it's going to serve as is, once I get it crumb coated, I'm going to stick it in the refrigerator to chill, and it will get nice and firm because it's made of butter. and I'll be able to handle it much easier without causing damage. Because when it's like this, soft and fluffy like this, you just look at it and you can damage it. So the idea here is just to give a coating and seal up holes. That's the other good reason for a crumb coat too. You'll find sometimes you have imperfections in your cake, little divots, little cracks, things like that. The icing can fill those and just make it smoother. Give you a nice smooth coating to start with. So now I've got a basic coating on there. We're going to go ahead and give this its final smoothing. So I'm going to lay my bench scraper down here nice and flat on the surface, but I'm going to lay it down so it's just barely touching the cake. I just want to smooth this icing. I'm not looking to take the icing off. I'm just looking to smooth it out. And as you can see, that's all the icing I took off. Just a little bit. Mostly it filled up all the pores, all the little cracks, any little imperfections, filled all those up. And because it's crummy, it's full of crumbs, I'm going to put it in a special container. I keep my crummy icing just in case I need it for later. Now what you'll notice is it formed, as I did that, it formed a little ridge around the outside. That ridge is going to help me level the top. So I'm going to take this little ridge, and this is kind of a leap of faith, but you just sort of find a little spot where you want to start, hold your tool almost perfectly flat, and just rub it right across to the center of the cake. We don't want to rub all the way across the cake because we don't want to draw icing all the way across and over the edge. We just want to draw it toward the center. And what we'll do is we'll do several of these overlapping strokes, just barely touching the top of the cake, just to smooth off that ridge and to make everything level. The idea here is a cake in a professional standpoint, a cake that is a good industry standard cake is perfectly vertical sides, perfectly level top, 90-degree corners. That's what we should have. Now, did my mother make them that way? No. She wasn't a professional baker. My grandmother didn't do it that way either. They did it with a butter knife, and they just made a big texture on it. And you can do texture. Texture is fun, but if you want your cake to really look professional, then you just try to start off with nice 90-degree corners, level top, vertical sides. I'm just cleaning up here around the bottom a little bit to get rid of any extra icing that might be here that I don't need. And this is ready for the refrigerator. Now, there's a lot of people out there who are professional cake designers. They don't bother refrigerating it very much because they can go right into their final coat. I recommend you guys refrigerate it just because it helps it get firm and it helps to make it nice and firm so that it won't be easy to damage. That said, for the sake of time in the demo, I'm just going to go ahead and start putting on the final coat. Let's just imagine this has been in the refrigerator for 15-20 minutes and we have a cake ready to coat here. The final coat of icing can be made in a lot of different ways. My original plan here was to make just a smooth coat of white icing. I'm going to put chocolate decorations around the side. I'm going to put rosettes on the top with little chocolate decorations and a little border around the base. The border I'm going to use is just called a standard, what they call a shell border. And it's going to be, you'll see it, it's very familiar. It's the kind of border you see on a lot of cakes. But I'm going to go ahead and just start applying a second coat here. This coat will be thicker and it's going to have, it's going to be opaque. You won't be able to see through it. So again, my icing spatula, I'm just going to kind of start it spreading a little bit, and then I'll just go from the center and start working my way out. Another way to get icing on a cake is with a piping bag. You could put all the icing in a piping bag, and you could start your tip here in the center, start squeezing, and then just start turning. And as you go, just start moving your way out. And you can make a bead of icing that goes all the way across if you like. That's kind of a fun way to do it. Other people have final coats. I've seen a few people who do final coats where they want the whole thing covered with texture. They want to use rosettes. A rosette is simply piping with a star tip in a round shape, so it looks like a rose. And some people use rosettes everywhere on their cake, and that will be their final coat. They just pipe the entire final coat instead of spreading it. I'll show you guys the spreading method here. So now they have the top covered, and it's got an overhang. I'm going to go ahead and apply a thicker coat of icing on the outside here. It's not going to look pretty at first. That's okay, because honestly I'm going to be scraping it and it's going to get smooth. So one of the things I had to do back when I worked in a hotel, and they had me switching around stations in different parts of the pastry department. And one day they gave me to the cake designer, and she handed me a speed rack full of 6-inch cakes. 6-inch cakes, just full speed rack of them. She says, I need them filled and crumb coated and put them in the freezer. Well, there were like 50 cakes then. Yeah, it was like, okay. So she gave me like 2 5-gallon buckets of buttercream, and I had to fill and crumb coat all those cakes. And you get pretty good at it after a while.
How long did it take?
It was a few hours, a few hours of, once you get going in a rhythm, things get going pretty fast. You have your tools all here, your mise en place is ready, everything goes faster. So that's not a pretty cake at this point. So I'm gonna do the same thing with a scraper. I'm just gonna go barely touching the cake. I'm just gonna go around and around until it starts to get smooth. And I'm laying the tool almost flat to give you an idea of how much this is affecting the icing. That's all the icing I've taken off so far. I haven't really taken off anything. What I'm doing instead is, as I'm going, it's spreading it around, smoothing it. So as I go, if I feel an area that's thicker, I'll just give it a little more pressure in that area, take off a little bit, and then that little bead ends up filling up an area that's thinner. So the idea here is to try to even out the icing and get it about the same thickness everywhere. So don't be afraid to spin it. In the process, as you can see, I'm starting to build a nice ridge here around the top. And that ridge is going to allow me to flatten this really nicely. So the outside is getting pretty nice and smooth. Let's do a couple. I can see a thick spot right there. Once I'm ready to pull my tool away, I'm just going to keep it spinning, and I'm just going to pull away gently. And as I do, if I go around, it's really hard to tell where I finish if I just pull straight away. If I pull away outward, it will leave a mark. The same thing goes for if I go too slowly and I stop and start, I'll leave little vertical marks in the side of the cake because the tool will leave those marks. So be aware of that as you're going. Smooth spinning really does help to make things go nice and to look nice and smooth. So now comes the ridge again. Just going to bring it on across. There are no crumbs in this icing, so I'm not too worried. I can put it right back in my main container here full of clean icing. I'm not worried about getting it right the first time. I'll go around a few times if I need to get this smoothed out. But the idea is overlapping strokes, turning it a little bit, cleaning off your tool, and going back and hitting it again. Each time you do it, it gets a little bit better. You just have to remind yourself to wipe off your tool, because if you put your tool back on with this icing on it, you're just going to be reapplying that icing. And it could go right here on the edge and hang over. And I'm not looking to get hangovers. I want it to smooth off the top. So I clean off to make sure I've got a tool free of icing each time I do this. Now I'm looking for imperfections, right? As I'm pretty happy with the top, is there any imperfections? Well, there's one. So all I have to do here, if I see something that needs filling, needs some help, I'll just put a glob of icing there. And I'll come around with the scraper and I'm going to scrape it again, just in those areas to give it a little bit of help. This has a need a little help right there. Yeah, it looks pretty good. So let's go back with the scraper again. This time I'll just carefully go along these areas here, just to help smooth those little imperfections out. And we'll come along where these bumps are here and we'll just smooth these across. And I'm pretty happy with that. Pretty nice vertical sides, pretty nice level top, and it's opaque. And it's got, you can't see the cake through it. I'm going to put this in the fridge now and give this a chance to harden up, and give it a chance to get firm. So if I touch it, it won't get damaged. Question? No. So when it comes out, then I'll be ready to put on a border, and I'll be ready to mark it for portions and be able to get it finished, do the finishing work on it. I do have a plan here for a border. As I drew here yesterday, I have a plan for rosettes. I think I'm gonna divide this cake. I'm gonna do this cake in 10 pieces, and dividing a cake by 10 can be a little challenging. All I do here to do that is I just make a light mark across the cake, and then I have to make another mark that I think is about 1/5 of the cake. So right about there. Then I'm just going to divide those two halves into quarters. Now, why do I pre-portion the cake? Why do I put these marks on there?
So we'll get topping for one per slice.
Yeah, I'll know where the slices are. And am I going to be the one cutting it and serving it? There's a good chance I'll probably end up having a server do that, right? So if, like, let's say Tanisha was a server in our dining room, and I handed her this, and it was going out to a table, and she's going to have to cut it in front of the customers, right in front of a table full of people. It's really helpful for her to have some cutting marks. She's going to be really happy I did that because it's going to take stress off of her, right? And as you guys know, if you work in a restaurant, take good care of your servers. They're the lifeblood of your front of the house, and they're the ones who talk with the customer, and they're stressed out enough as it is. So that's the reason I do it. I make marks, just light marks, just to help know where those portions are going to be. If I was serving this at home, I wouldn't bother with the portioning like that, unless somebody else was going to be cutting it and they wanted that. But this is now portioned for 10, so if it's going to help me with my garnish, though, I'm going to put a rosette on each portion. I'll put a little decoration on each portion. I'll do a border around the base. I have just enough cardboard showing to get a nice border on there. I'll just load up a piping bag with a star tip to do that border on the bottom. I'll do the same star tip for some rosettes. A little earlier, I went and made some chocolate decorations. The other class, we were doing piping with chocolate, so I made a bunch of chocolate decorations. And these were just piped out with chocolate. And then I'll probably use some of these on my cake, but then on the side decorations, those rectangles, all I did was took some melted chocolate, and as it was getting hard, I took a small spatula and I scored it in little rectangles. And those can be lifted up and placed right on the cake. And they'll just look nice. It'll be for visual contrast more than anything. Any of you could do that too today if you want. I have a bowl of chocolate over there on warm water. It's staying in a liquid state for now. And if you decide you want to do something with chocolate, it doesn't require tempering. This particular chocolate is something that will harden on its own. So you can spread it, you can cut out shapes, you can pipe it if you want, you can do a lot of things. And it's fun to do. Chocolate's always fun. Nobody ever complains if you put chocolate on it. Put decorations on the chocolate. You won't see anybody complain. So chocolate decorations are relatively easy to make. All I did was just piped them out. So off to the fridge this goes though. It needs to rest for a little bit. I'll clean up my station, make sure there's nothing here to get in my way, make sure my tools are clean. I'll just kind of straighten up, and then I'll be ready to do that. Do be aware of how much icing you have. You can see here how much I have left. Not a lot, right? I just made one batch of Swiss. It was enough to cover this cake. But I knew just looking in that bowl, it wouldn't be enough to fill it as well. So I went and I used simple as my filling. This will be enough for my border and my decorations, but it's easy to run out of icing. If you need to, if you had to, you can always make another batch of icing today. We have to, and let's say Zeke says, I really need some more icing. He decides to make a new batch, a full batch of Swiss or something. If he has more than he needs, of course, we can share it around the room. I'm going to have extra simple. I'm going to have lots of extra simple. Yeah, I've got tons of extra simple here. And it's just pure white. So that's open for anyone to use. A little later also, I'm going to show you guys a bit about piping roses and leaves. So if you want to use any flowers, any roses on your cake, you can pipe them off the cake, refrigerate them, get them firm, and then we can lift them and just place them on the cake. I also have a series of piping tips called, I did bring in the Russian piping tips. They're kind of fun to play with. They're very unusual piping tips where you hold them in one position and you turn as you pipe, and it makes for these fairly large drop flowers. It looks easier than it is. I also have little drop flower tips which can be used. They're again, you put your wrist in this position, and as you're piping, you turn and squeeze and lift away, and it'll make a beautiful little flower. There's a little card in there from the packaging that shows the kind of things these tips make. Yeah, you can see they make cute little flowers. These are piped directly on the cake, usually, and they're fun. If you want to just have something that's fairly easy and fairly quick, you could do a series, like a little series of flowers here that maybe spills over on the side. You have little flowers stuck to the side, if you like that sort of thing. So I brought in a bunch of tips for that kind of thing. If you want to play with the Russian tips, these are like those drop flower tips, but bigger. Like this tip, very unusual, but you can see by the slits on the side, if you squeeze, the icing is going to start coming out the side. And there's a little star on the end, which means it's going to come out the end. You put it down like this with a piping bag, and as you're squeezing, you twist and lift away. And you get this very interesting effect. It gets this sort of spiral effect. There's many others in here. This one is 4 roses. Each one of those little holes makes a petal. So once you do that, you just twist a little bit as you go up, and you get this little tiny briar roses. Lots of possibilities when it comes to these. It's fun to play with. I'll have them out here, so if you want to test them, you can use some simple and play with the tips. All I ask is that if you use them, just put them back in the container again. That way we can keep them straight. And clean. Yes, clean, please.
Don't put them in the container.
Yes, clean, please. I'll put a little bit of piping bags out here for these kind of tips. The big piping bags are good for big stuff, so these are the big green ones, really this long, and they're good when you need a larger capacity. So I've got a fresh box here as well. All right, so any questions? The first thing you would be to get your icing all whipped and refreshed. Start getting your mise en place together. I have offset and straight spatulas over here on the shelf. We've got bench scrapers over on the shelf. And of course, I've got tools. And as you start building your workstation, then we can, I'll be coming over to help out and answer questions, things like that. Let me shut off the video. I don't know how long I've gone.